Hey everybody, Jared Marrero with ThisisReynoldsburg here. I'm sitting at cross-side from Mary Weeks. Mary, you just published a book. Can you tell us a little bit about, first of all, who you are? Give us a little background on where the book gets started.
So I am the principal at Herbert Mills, now STEAM Elementary here in Reynoldsburg. We just got designated yesterday. But before I became a principal, I was an instructional coach, and before that I was a teacher. And in all of those roles, it was clear that there was just not a lot for new teachers just coming out of college. So the name of the book is Teaching Land, which is a spin, from Zombieland, and it's a teacher's guide to the classroom, to surviving the classroom apocalypse, because sometimes those first couple of years can feel like the zombie apocalypse. So it's the whole idea of the book was around finding ways to support new teachers as they embark on their journey.
So this was something that immediately, like getting into the book, that I was very appreciative of, that you make this sort of metaphor between zombies and being a teacher and surviving in the zombie apocalypse. I thought that was very enjoyable to read myself. Mm-hmm. When you first thought of the book, sort of take us through the conceptions, because you had a writing partner. Take us through some of the conceptions with your writing partner of how you came across this metaphor and how you guys decided to compare being a teacher to surviving in a zombie apocalypse.
So when you're a new teacher, there are so many things thrown at you. And for a lot of these new teachers, their practical experience is just as good as the teacher that they followed around during their student teaching. And a lot of times, the teachers that new teachers are paired with when they're learning to become a teacher are teachers who have been in practice for a really long time, and that's really good, but they're not always the teachers that are up on innovative strategies. And so when Amanda and I first thought of doing this book, I was the president outgoing, and she was the incoming president of the ISTE Young Educators Network. So it was sort of my job in that role to, bring new teachers in and talk about how to use technology effectively. And we collaborated with teachers from all over the world. There was over 1,300 young teachers in that organization who were talking about their challenges and their struggles. So it originally started as an idea for a field guide, but then one of our colleagues, made a joke about, it's kind of like, surviving the zombie apocalypse those first few years, because there are so many things and you don't really, until you've experienced it, it's hard to know what you'll do with, when different challenges arise. And so then we decided to use that as sort of the theme of our book.
You also taught on the East Coast, am I correct?
I did. So I actually started my teaching career outside of Boston in a small suburb called Natick. And they were doing some really great and innovative things. And so based on all the experience that I got there, being on a blended learning pilot team for the district, I was able to bring a lot of that here to the districts that I worked in here in Ohio. And that's how I got involved with the International Society for Technology and Education, or ISTE. I won an Emerging Leader Award from them in 2015, and then I went on to become president of their Young Educator Network.
Awesome. How different is, to get off topic real quick, living in the East Coast versus living in Ohio?
So I was actually born and raised in southeastern Ohio, like rural southeastern Ohio. And when my husband and I graduated from OU, we kind of looked around and realized that there was nothing for us. And so we decided we wanted to experience, life somewhere else. And so we moved to Boston, and it's very, very different. But, we do enjoy like the slower pace and all of that, here in Ohio. Yeah.
Yeah. My family's originally from New Jersey, and that was something like almost immediately when they moved to Ohio, they were like, it's so slow here. Mm-hmm. Some people like it. Some people don't like it as much. But yeah, my family was definitely had to get used to that slowness and just sort of calm down and the pacing of life. So yeah, getting into sort of, you guys began writing the book. Tell us a little bit about sort of the background of education and the education system in America and how that sort of guided your beginning philosophies when you started writing the book.
Well, I think that one of the things that people really love to point out is that teachers are expected to do more and more. Back in the 50s and 60s, you went to school and you did what you were told. But we were talking about a very different society back then, when you're talking about like working on a line or in a factory where you want things to all be the same, like that worked. But, when we're talking about 21st century learning, it really requires us to educate the whole child, because we are preparing them for jobs that haven't even been created yet. And that's a huge task for a brand new teacher, especially when, I'm not sure that I believe that higher ed has caught up, to the 21st century expectations that we're supposed, and experiences that we're supposed to be providing to our students. So they're having to do a lot of like on the job, work and thinking. And if you think about, I believe that empathy is foundational to all design and all innovation. And so I think that we're, as teachers and educators, our task should be to develop those innovative, empathetic thinkers that are ready to take on those 21st century jobs that we don't even know exist yet. So what does that require, right? Like that requires creative problem solving. That requires the ability to work with others. And it's definitely a big job.
Yeah. So when I first went through Reynoldsburg High School, I guess Reynoldsburg is a little bit different from the common high school, but it's sort of getting into where other high schools are getting into in the United States as far as expanding their role and expanding the sort of subjects that they cover. I remember when I went in, I had very little interest in any specific category of schooling. I wasn't interested in science. I wasn't interested in math. I was kind of interested in English. But a lot of my interest lied in what we're doing now, in podcasting and media and advertising. And Reynoldsburg really didn't have anything to offer me before high school. Then I came to high school, I went to Encore, where they have a really good art program and a really good advertising and media program. How hard is it if a high school doesn't have these things in place, these sort of different academies that kids can go to and explore what they want to do when they get older, explore the jobs that might not be available right now? How important is it, or how hard is it for teachers to sort of facilitate this type of different learning and this type of different approach to education if they don't have those tools in place already?
I mean, I think that's really difficult, and I think that really, like, that's the task of leadership, right? To support those opportunities so that teachers can create those innovative experiences for kids. If you don't have the support from the top, it would be very challenging unless you were willing to do the work of writing grants and securing funding on your own. And that's not something that you learn how to do, when you're coming up. And so I think that as administrators, we need to make sure that we're supporting teachers in creating these high impact experiences for kiddos. Yeah.
So in the beginning of the book, there was sort of a preparation section, basically preparing for the readers for what's to come. And in that, you guys mentioned 4 or 5 things that sort of led to the decline in education, or at least a decline in what people thought education was doing for their children. Those were bad testing practices, social media, technology, and pressure to conform to what education sort of thought should be the mandate. Can you just walk us through each of these things, starting with bad testing practices? What is bad testing, and what are teachers talking about when they say that they don't want to test their kids to death, or they don't want to test students until they know something? What is your philosophy on testing?
So I think that, it's important that we're constantly measuring where our students are. We, in the United States, we've really gone to a system of, standardized testing to measure, as an accountability measure for teachers. But I think that what those tests can't measure are the issues that students are coming in with. And again, that goes back to educating the whole child, but I'm not certain that there's a standardized measure where we can measure, how we're teaching, the whole child. I know that at Herbert Mills, we have done a lot of work around social and emotional learning and restorative practices, but the test that we take measures literacy and math, and we need that, right? And I think that those social and emotional skills are sort of, if you don't have those in place, it's difficult to learn just at all, or learn in a meaningful way. But I think that some of the testing practices that we have in place, while we need to keep a pulse on how students are doing, I'm not sure that it always meets that end.
And that answers my question. Great. That sort of leads into the pressure to conform and the pressure to sort of make these kids succeed in testing. How does that change a teacher's philosophy, and how does that change what a teacher is meant to do if they're just trying to make the student pass the test?
So I think that, at least in Reynoldsburg, our philosophy is that while those tests, are important, it's the metric by which we're measured. It's not the only thing that we look at when we're measuring success. So I think it all depends on the messaging from the top, right? Like what do we consider the portrait of a successful learner? Is it just those test scores? I think that most people would say no. So I think it really depends. I think, the degree to which we are celebrating the other successes allows the teachers to have a little bit more flexibility to focus on, what we consider important that will make students successful in the 21st century.
Yeah. And flipping the coin, you talk about 21st century, nothing has been more of an impact than social media and technology on education. How do those things play into what teachers are trying to do in the classroom?
So I think that it's really important, communication is everything and the messaging is everything. And I think that social media is a fantastic way for teachers to, show the amazing experiences that they're creating for kids. I know that in our building we use Twitter all the time, and we're constantly tweeting out and sharing, sort of, our design challenges and the other like high impact learning experiences. And so I think social media is a really valuable tool.
I see every day we run ThisisReynoldsburg's Twitter account and Instagram account. Almost every day we're retweeting or liking teachers who are sort of showing what they're doing in the class. And I think that's a huge advantage for the community because it sort of brings the community in on what the children are doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and what the younger generation is doing. I love seeing every day new experiments that the teachers are doing with the students or new things that they're helping the students learn. And I think that's a great way to interact with the community.
Well, and to demonstrate those successes, right? Like, the test scores tell you one thing, but if you can see, kids using robots as autonomous vehicles or building 3D scale models of our city or coming up with solutions to end hunger and poverty, I think that those are just as meaningful.
So you talked about, in the beginning of the book, you talk about this, but you also mentioned it here a little bit. Sort of the foundation of education. Education was founded on the principle of training children for the factory, or training children how to work in a factory and how to work in a very organized way. What now is the challenge, and how do we change from the factory way of learning to an individual style approach? How do we take a student who has his own problems, his own things at home, and take her or him and sort of develop him into a leader or into someone who's going to work in the modern day?
I think that that's a great question. And I think that if any of us had, a hard and fast answer to that, it would solve all kinds of problems. But I think, at least in my building, we're really pushing the whole child approach. So we're looking at the child in terms of where they are with their social emotional skills. How do we build those? We're doing circles every day, both as a community building practice, but then also we also do restorative circles when harm has been caused, and we're really trying to teach them to solve conflict on their own and ask hard questions and be critical thinkers and problem solvers. I think if you can figure out where children's interests lie, like you were talking about with the podcasting, and tailor what you're doing to meet that and provide those meaningful learning experiences, I think that that's the best way that we have at this point to make sure that they're ready for the world. Yeah,
it's hard, right? Because you're taking a system in which parents are wanting to hold schools accountable. They want to make sure that their children are learning useful tools to prepare them either for college or for the workforce. And it's hard to show them necessarily that they're learning art or that they're learning something that you can't really test. It's something that I think is very important for us to figure out as a community, as a sort of local and national community, because it's impossible to tell parents that a student's really good in art or could have a future in art when there's no test to test how good they paint or how good they write. So I think that's very important. So you mentioned in the book sort of toxicity of other teachers and how other teachers can sort of ruin the education or the faculty who are educating the students. Take us through some of the sort of toxicity that you've seen either on the East Coast or here in Ohio that teachers should stray away from or should try to at least avoid?
So we talk about the educator archetypes in the book, and the whole idea of that is to be very tongue-in-cheek and funny. Like, I can identify with 5 or 6 of those archetypes at various points in my career, and even sometimes throughout the day. But I think that and I don't think that any of them are bad. I think every teacher has something to bring to the table, and we talk about how you can leverage the strengths of each of those different types of teachers or each of those styles, right? And find a way to collaborate and make workable solutions. But I think that it's important, as a building or as a teaching faculty or learning community, that you have a focus, right? So what is the goal for your students? And once you know that, then all of those archetypes, or all of those types of people and teachers can find ways to come together to rally around that, even if the approach isn't always the same.
Yeah. So what is the focus then at Herbert Mills?
So we have a global focus and we have a humanities focus. And so our goal is to create culturally competent global thinkers and citizens that are ready to take on those 21st century challenges. So we use the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as our platform to create those high impact experiences for kids. And we have all kinds of teachers in my building. But all of those personalities are what makes it amazing, in my opinion. I love the diversity of the staff, and I love the diversity of our students. And so you have those highly organized types that are great taskmasters and, keeping projects, moving. And then you have the more creative types or the innovators that, can dream up literally anything. And so I think it's a matter of, not that any of them are toxic or bad. I think it's more of how do you find common ground? It's just like any workplace culture, right? Yeah.
So in the book, again, you mentioned one of the biggest advantage or one of the things that teachers can do for students is make them lifelong learners. Mm-hmm. This is a term that I think is a little bit cliched. And when teachers or when, grown-ups use these words, I think a lot of my peers roll their eyes. Mm-hmm. I think that a lot of that comes from just the word of learning, of education was never fun for me or fun for any of my peers. So why would we want to learn forever? Mm-hmm. This is especially important now that I'm in my first year of college and that I'm working full-time here at Connor Funeral Home, because I'm realizing more and more as I move on in life that being a lifelong learner is very important. Mm-hmm. It's not just learning more math. It's not just learning more science. It's learning how to apply different things that you're learning in education to your life, to your relationships, to anything that can go on. So tell us a little bit about how Herbert Mills is trying to grow lifelong learners.
So in creating empathetic global thinkers, our building is very diverse, both economically and ethnically. And, through our circle practices and our social and emotional learning practices, we are teaching them to collaborate and work well and solve problems with people that are different than them. And that's a life skill. So we really try to look at things, yes, we're teaching them math, we're teaching them reading, we're teaching them social studies, but then we're bringing all of those things together using those sustainable development goals as a platform to solve real problems in their world, and they're problems that are not going away anytime soon, right? And so, in doing that, we're also tapping into their passions. And I think that when you're talking about being a lifelong learner, you always go back to those things that you're passionate about. And by exposing them to all kinds of different issues and topics, I think that we're fostering that lifelong learning.
Yeah. We mentioned before the podcast started about how one of your classrooms is trying to start a studio and trying to facilitate some of this passion learning that you're talking about. I think that's very important, because for someone who has a passion about something, they learn 10 times easier, 10 times faster. Mm-hmm. If I had a podcasting class when I was little, I would have learned it in 2 seconds because I would have had the passion for it. So I think that's an awesome thing that you guys are doing to sort of facilitate the passion and the education of the passion that the students are willing to follow. So as you go on in the book, you mention teachers as role models, mm-hmm. and you mention the fact how important it is for teachers to be lifelong learners themselves, to have positive traits so that their students see that. I just want to give a shout out real quick to Mrs. Murgatroyd. She's an art teacher at Encore. And literally, I don't think there's any teacher who has had a bigger impact on me growing up as Mrs. Murgatroyd. And I think one of the biggest reasons is that she didn't tell me what to do and what not to do, and try to. It was that I was watching her every day face the things that she was telling us, and then going around or improving her stance or jumping over obstacles using the things that she was teaching us. And I think that was something that was truly amazing. Can you speak a little bit to how you encourage your teachers, or you encourage the peers around you to do the same thing as Mrs. Murgatroyd, to lead by example?
We try to make sure that we provide the PD and support to our teachers to make sure that they have the skills themselves to then put on our students. We also offer lots of opportunities for professional learning for our teachers whenever there's money. If in the opportunity, I try to offer them PD and high impact strategies and things like that. We've done a lot of work over this past year around cultural awareness and cultural competence to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all of our learners, as well as a lot of PD around restorative practices and really building that strong community. Because if your community is strong, it's easier for teachers to be those role models and model those things they want to see in kids.
So in the book, you also mentioned treating your career as a marathon as opposed to a sprint. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more and tell us why it's important that teachers do this?
So the school year, it definitely has its highs and lows. You've got, fall testing, you've got spring testing. There's, demands of parents and, demands coming down from the district. It's a lot. So it's really important that you look at the end game, right? So what is it that we want for kids and how do we get there? And so if you can look at it that way, it's easier to not get bogged down in the day-to-day.
So many people know about the history of schools. And so what do you think are the biggest things that teachers can do themselves? Because, if we look at the problem of the school system, it's such a big problem that it's really hard for a teacher of a kindergarten class or a teacher of a high school class to try and face those huge problems. What are some of the things that teachers can sort of do by themselves to fix the larger problem that education is having right now?
So I think that it's important that you focus on your trench in your classroom and trying to figure out like how you can share and learn from others to bring best practices in, because those things spread like wildfire, right? A teacher sees a teacher down the hall doing something amazing, and then they want to try it themselves. And like just really being there for your colleagues, because it's not an easy job, and sometimes it's a thankless job. And at Herbert Mills, we have a pineapple chart where teachers can write down some of the cool things that they're doing in their classrooms, and then other teachers can go and visit. And it's just watching, no feedback. It's just so that they can go and implement. So try to set up, systems with your peers so that you can observe each other and get ideas from each other. Leverage that planning time that you have. And I know that sometimes that's precious, to collaborate and share and don't be afraid to go out on Twitter and see what's out there. There's some fantastic ideas out there.
I think every day, me and Ryan and Austin all work in this office. I think we do a lot of the same things you've just mentioned, is taking things from each of our disciplines and sort of applying it to each other and seeing how we can help each other. That's huge for any workplace, but I think it's especially huge for education. So can you describe the difference between, you mentioned a growth mindset in the book. Mm-hmm. Can you describe a growth mindset versus one that's just staying the same, or one that doesn't want to grow or doesn't want to do things differently?
So it's really, I think humans just by nature are, creatures of habit, and we want to do things the way that we've always done them. It's funny because, I notice, in a lot of my conversations with parents, they struggle with the fact that we do things differently from the way that they learned spelling or math or whatever. But I think, in terms of teachers, it's important to realize that the only thing that's constant in this profession is change. And so I think the more that we can embrace that sometimes things get messy, and that's okay. And as long as the goal remains doing what's best for kids, I just don't think that you can go wrong. I think that you can keep climbing. And if you're willing to go out there and explore and see, what teachers in other places are doing, I think that really gives you, an opportunity to create some pretty amazing things for your kids.
Earlier you mentioned sort of some of the problem in education being the lackluster performance, or the lackluster ability for education past high school, for college education, to be there for students. What are some of the difficulties or some of the things that you think college can do better that it's currently not doing?
So what I notice with, or what I'm hearing from new teachers and what I heard from them when I was doing the Young Educator Network is that a lot of times teachers would be paired with teachers that have been in the classroom for a really long time. And so they were not getting innovative experiences and they weren't learning how to be innovative. They were having to learn that on their own. And it was just a lot for them while also learning the demands of the job. Because until you are standing in front of 25 little people and trying to command that room on your own, you have no idea what it's actually going to be like. So I think that making sure that professors are having to stay current with trends in education. And, I feel like, in my own experiences in higher education, a lot of times I felt like what I was learning was whatever that professor, whatever the last thing that he or she had done, and that might have been 15 years ago. I didn't learn to be an innovative teacher. In my coursework, I learned to be an innovative teacher from the cooperating teacher I had when I was a student teacher.
How can we, I guess, a lot of complaints from college professors or from colleges in general are that students aren't ready for college, that a large percentage of students go into their freshman or sophomore year not ready to face the general education classes that are put in front of them. What can a high school or even an elementary school do to start preparing children for college?
I think that we just need to make sure that our standards starting even in kindergarten all the way through grade 12 match, what it is that colleges are hoping to see. I'm an elementary principal, so that's sort of my focus. That's what I know. So I don't know that I have a whole lot of suggestions on how to make English 10, better for getting students college ready. But I think more of those vertical conversations between high school and colleges could be really helpful. But I think vertical conversations K-12 could be just as equally impactful. Yeah.
What are you guys doing, I guess, at the elementary level to get students ready for the next step? And is it so much anymore that you're trying to get them ready for the next step, or is it that you're just trying to evolve them from point A to point B? What is this philosophy for growth as far as when a student enters elementary school and when they leave elementary school?
So our goal is, we definitely want to make sure that they're ready for the middle level, and we always talk about having those vertical conversations, but they're not something that we have spent a lot of time doing yet. But I think that that's something that will be coming down in the future, making sure that, we have pacing guides that sort of tell us what we need to be teaching students in each grade level. And so those get progressively more intense as, students learn more through the grade levels. But I think that vertical conversations would really help like all districts and, actually hearing teachers talk to other teachers about what their students know and are able to do when they leave them.
Yeah. A lot of school systems or a lot of districts, when they get in a bout of trouble, a lot of parents suggest shaving off or at least cutting administrators. Mm-hmm. What has been your experience and how do administrators help the school system and how can they actually hinder the school system?
I think administrators are important in helping determine the direction of a school. And so, I think that it's important that we have people that are able to get into classrooms and support teachers. I think that we need to look at how we're defining administrator too, because in my role as principal, I try to also be a coach. I was an instructional coach in a past life, and I try to get into classrooms and make sure that I'm offering the support that my teachers need.
I would especially say that I was so thorough because the book was so enjoyable.
Oh, well, thank you.
So yeah, anybody looking to be in the teacher profession or going into that field should definitely take a look at Teaching Land, because I think even I'm not a teacher. I'm just graduated, and I understood the metaphors that you were trying to give, and I understood how teachers can be a better teacher just by reading the first 4 chapters. So
well, thank you.
Yeah, it's a very good read. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sitting down and answering my questions.
Thank you for having me.